there was one exhibit which the parties disagreed on whether or not it should be admitted into evidence. And I wanted to just briefly raise that issue.
What exhibit was that?
145, Your Honor. The court will recall that Mr. Ross and talked about some of the references that a lot of the revenue information is generally published in the industry and trade publications and the like. This is an example of that, Your Honor. This is, obviously, it's a copy, it's not an original. It's something called the Engineering News Record, dated October 14, 2013. And it has lists top 50 firms in electrical, and on the page 74, with Sargent Electric and some of Sargent Electric's total revenue for 2012 and some of their new contract revenue and where it's coming from, what industries, etc. I think the document just speaks for itself, just something for argument. But certainly, I don't think the basis not to have admitted into evidence.
But, Your Honor, the basis is lack of foundation. We don't know where the numbers come from, if they're accurate, and there's a suggestion that there was a Sargent source to this, and we don't know that. This hasn't been discussed at any time in this hearing or in any deposition. So we object to it on the grounds of lack of foundation.
Is there any relevance?
Just the relevance of the talk of some confidential nature of revenue information, some Sargent's revenue information, or at least what purports to be. I think it's a fair statement. What purports to be Sargent's revenue information is published for everyone to see in the Engineering News Record.
I also object, Your Honor, since it does seem appropriate on the grounds of relevance that this document appears to be from 2012 and has nothing to do with what we're talking about in this case, which is the period from October 1, 2013 through...
Well, if you hadn't brought it up, I've already looked at it.
Well, there are, I mean, to be fair, Your Honor, there are exhibits that parties have agreed to admit into evidence and might be part of any post findings of fact, even though they weren't actually discussed.
In other words, some of the confidential information has been discussed here, is disseminated throughout the industry. Is that what you... where it comes from, or what it is, or who gave me the information, we don't know.
We're saying there's no foundation for that, but Your Honor, whatever.
Go the weight, I guess. I mean,
it's a weight issue.
All right. Okay.
So
for that limited, very limited purpose, I mean, I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay. Half hour?
Yes.
I'll let you know when we're getting close.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
You're going to send up a flare? Lights out? The lights are going to go out like...
Okay.
Okay. I guess I'll get you into the first minute already, but I'll get up on my horse. Your Honor, first, thank you very much for your patience throughout this proceeding. Obviously, we genuinely appreciate it. In addition, on behalf of Mr. Leno, who asked me to remember him to you, thank you for allowing him to be on for what he's doing this week, unfortunately. Your Honor, this is, as you know, a trade secret case. And this is a case that, in the amended complaint, has multiple counts. We're not going to run through each of the counts. We're going to focus the court's attention on three in particular. There is a count 3 that relates to breach of fiduciary duties, count 5, which relates to unfair competition, and I believe it's count 9, Your Honor, which relates to violation of the Indiana Trade Secret Act. And as the court's also very familiar, the standard here at a preliminary injunction stage is that Sargent needs to establish, to your satisfaction, that there is a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits, that irreparable harm has occurred, that the balance of harm rests against or with Sargent, and that the public interest actually is in favor of the entry of a preliminary injunction. And one of the things we wanted to do, Your Honor, since there's been lots of testimony and lots of discussion about timelines, is that we'd like to weave into this the use of your technology. We think, in this case, a picture.
Middle one. This one. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Is of real value. And what we have done, Your Honor, is we've created a timeline of what we believe are relevant events between the 1st of January until April 16th, 2014, and we'll weave that into our closing. If I can take you back before we get to January of 2014, though, it's last Friday. One of the things that you heard last Friday, read into the record, was testimony from an individual, Steve Farah, who was the Director of Human Resources at MJ Electric. And in connection with reading his testimony, we referred you, Your Honor, to Exhibit 52 in the binders. And Exhibit 52, in a very significant way, sums up what's going on in this case. There is bad blood, which is what Mr. Farah described as what was going on in the office in East Chicago between Mr. Voss and Mr. Guest. And as a result of that bad blood, something was about to happen. On February 11th, internal emails at MJ Electric says MJ was preparing to put a full-court press on Northwest Indiana, a place where they had no business, no contacts, nothing, until that day. And, Your Honor, what we start to show here is that that bad blood, as you may recall, dates back to Mr. Voss being passed over as president of his view by Mr. Guest. And what did you hear? The two key people in the office in East Chicago, Mr. Voss and Mr. Frank, either felt passed over, not appreciated, not paid enough, insulted, not allowed to run things the way they want. And who's the source of the problem? Who's the person that they're most miserable about and angry with? It's Mr. Guest. Why is that important? Because in breach of fiduciary duty case in Indiana, Your Honor, going back to the SVS or factory case, courts take a very careful look at intention. And when people are getting ready to leave an employer, as SJS says, you need to walk on the right side of the line, not a side of the line that is looking at and motivated by destruction of your former employer, but one that says, I'm going to do everything right and I'm going to walk out the door to proceed with the rest of my life, whatever that happens to be. As we pointed out, as the evidence will show, that did not happen in this case. What happened instead? And we're going to recount not each and every event that happened, but the events are going to relate not only to that breach of fiduciary duty count, Mr. Ross and Mr. Crane were sitting in the East Chicago office planning a startup company, what actually became MJE as a startup to compete with Sargent. In addition, what was going on, as this is going to show, I think we're about to start moving through the slides, Your Honor. Meetings began to occur that MJ Electric started to participate in, and...
I'm sorry, why is it on?
Yours is not.
This one is going to start. Is it like soccer?
No, they're all supposed to be the same, Your Honor. I think it has to do with the power surge.
Yes.
Just a matter of fact.
There we go. It's on now.
Transfer this, you got to charge.
Yeah, you say we're good.
Don't see it either. Wait. Over here.
Where's the mainframe plugged into?
It's in the hall closet.
All right, I'll just look at it up there.
Okay.
So I can see.
How is it not working?
No, it's not. I'm sorry.
It's just off. It was on earlier.
No troubles.
There it is. Okay, it's coming on.
Okay, good.
All right, we're on.
Okay, if it's working, Your Honor, I want to use it. If it's not, I'll just...
We're on. It's you working fine.
Okay, thank you. So, Your Honor, in the context of these three claims in particular now, beginning of January, the beginning of the bad flood, there are certain events that we want to remind you about. In addition to the breach of fiduciary duty claim that we're going to talk about, the unfair competition, we also have a trade secret account, as I mentioned. And what we show here, Your Honor, is that starting on January 7th, 2014, there's actually the movement of 9 bank boxes by Mr. Crane from the East Chicago office. What happens next, Your Honor? On January 10th, 2014, Mr. Voss asked John Gordish, a financial employee, to provide him with Sargent's actual revenue numbers by customer for our four largest customers for 2013 with gross margins included. Just on the same day, by coincidence, on January 10th, 2014, the first project that would ultimately walk through the door at MJE is actually underway by Mr. Simmons at Sargent Electric. He's conducting a walkthrough of Monticello Line 18. He was able to gain access to Monticello for this because Sargent was there. Sargent had the access. Sargent allowed for the walkthrough. Sargent allowed for the pictures to be taken that, as you're going to recall, Your Honor, and I'll mention again, ended up on the computer of MJE. Those were pictures that Mr. Simmons described as significant to him, so he could get his mind back in the game and understand what was needed that would relate to creating an estimate for Monticello Line 18, and that started as early as January 10th, 2014 at Sargent. What happens next By January 14th, 2014, Mr. Voss creates the business analysis that we talked about. This is the business analysis that relied on Sargent actual recurring revenue. That recurring revenue, Your Honor, the testimony showed, relates to maintenance projects in primary part. Why is that significant? Because that's the bedrock type of work that electrical companies want to budget year in, year out to understand that they're going to be able to cover their overhead, among other things. And that starts that day. What else happens on January 14th? Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame meet in Mr. Voss's office to review a business analysis and prepare for the MJE meeting. What do they discuss, among other things? For the first time, they're discussing enticements, Your Honor. And as you heard from Mr. Frame and as you heard from Mr. Nagy, there were specific names associated with the 5 general foreman estimators who were identified on that list. And as Mr. Nagy testified just yesterday, those 5 employees first identified on January 14, 2014 have been delivered, Mr. Nagy's words, have been delivered to MJ. What else happens that day? Voss and Frame, for the first time, meet with MJE representatives, Mr. Voss getting Mr. Frame ready, as he says, to that meeting. What happens next? 2 days after a successful meeting, Mr. Frame is accessing something we're going to see on a couple of different occasions, his BP estimates. BP, Your Honor, is crucial to this case for multiple reasons. BP, USS, ArcelorMittal, and NISCO, as you heard from Mr. Gush yesterday, represent roughly 95% of the revenue that comes into this office. That's undisputed. At this point in this proceeding, why else is BP important? Because that's the target for Quanta and MJ. As we heard yesterday, as we've seen through the documents, including the announcement written by Mr. Rockwell, the Executive Vice President of MJ Electric, on February 11, 2014, there was a major push, and there is a major push by Quanta right now to advance its oil and gas presence throughout the United States. And as Mr. Rockwell testified just yesterday, BP, petrochemical, that's a major target. And what else do we know? On the January 14th business analysis that was done, $500 million worth of contracts each year for the next 3 years are anticipated to be coming out of BP. So after dinner, after a discussion about a variety of things, BP starts to become front and center. Next, Your Honor, by the very next day, and actually 3 days after the dinner, Frame returns the bankers' boxes because, as the testimony reflected, he thought they'd be important for people to have those left behind for use as it relates to everything from estimating to understanding outcomes for the operation of the Sargent business. On the same day, you may not have a box for this, on the same day, Your Honor, January 17th, Mr. Rockwell, as he testified yesterday, calls Mr. Voss and says he wants to proceed. 3 days later, what happens next? For the first time in the system, what you see is on January 20th, 2014, there's a revision to this business analysis of Mr. Voss, and as it turns out, in the system, it is labeled as, we're going to try to rotate this for you, Your Honor, it is labeled, more properly, misidentified, mislabeled as Go Final Review. Why? To cover his tracks. Why? Tying in the breach of fiduciary duties. He doesn't want anybody at Sargent to know that he's sitting in his office as the top executive in that office, preparing a plan with a national company, MJE, and a $6 billion giant, Quanta, that opened the door for competition they couldn't otherwise compete, and had been unsuccessful for 16 prior years trying to enter one. What happens next, Your Honor? On January 22nd, you'll see that, well, let's move past that one. I'm not sure. On January 23rd, Your Honor, this is a significant day, as you're going to recall, I'm sure. This is the day of the Four Seasons lunch, midday, meeting with Mr. Wrighton. What happens after that? Mr. Wrighton and Mr. Rockwell, as Mr. Rockwell testified just yesterday, realized this is a golden opportunity to get into a market we haven't already been in and haven't found a way to get in for 16 years. And Boston framed a way for us to get in. What happens? After that meeting, Wrighton and Mr. Rockwell decided we should extend offers, and the very next day, on January 24th, Boston Frame received oral offers of employment from MJE. Again, Sargent knows nothing about this activity. What happens next? On January 28th, 2014, Boston Frame received written offers of employment from MJE. By roughly the end of that month, January 30, 31, the offers of employment have been accepted. A key point that came up in the evidence, Your Honor, was never before, at least as Mr. Rockwell can recall it, in the absence of a business plan, in the absence of a pro forma, in the absence of any advanced plan, and in just 10 days, had MJE ever moved from considering hiring the two people to deciding to open an office. That's what happened in this case. And the pace then starts to quicken, Your Honor. By February 3rd, Mr. Rockwell, the Executive Vice President of MJE, is deciding he's going to come to East Chicago during working hours with senior executives at Sargent to do multiple things. What are they doing? 1, scouting office locations. 2, having dinner to discuss enticements for the 5 key employees who were identified in the business plan as early as January 14. 3, specifically discussing the $7,500, the trucks, the vacation pay, the holiday pay that's needed as enticements in order to deliver Tom Crane's guys to Sargent. And that is discussed on the 3rd, along with a 90-day plan for what's going to happen next. By February 4th, Your Honor, MJE, and I think the email that you looked at shows they didn't waste any time. By 8 o'clock a.m. the next morning, all the enticements are approved for the 5 individuals who were identified, and who Boston Frame told Maggie that they could deliver to MJE. They didn't want to use the word, Your Honor, because it seems wrong and inappropriate, but the word that came out of Mr. Rockwell's mouth that applies here is the coup is started. And how does this apply? Why does this, in addition to breaching fiduciary duties because you're hiding what you're doing from your employer and setting up a competitor to come in, why is this also unfair competition? The unfair competition law in Indiana says this, that a company that has years, if not decades, of experience in a market actually obtains, as a result of being a good commercial citizen and prospering in that market, a property interest in its business, which may not be attacked by a party who is actually seeking to knock it out of business. That's the ultimate goal here, Your Honor. And what they do is this pays quickness. They took 6 of the 9 general foreman estimators, the key people who manage the office, who keep the stream of work alive, who allow you to bid on new matters. Gone. Delivered. What else do we know? That the business analysis to go final review on or about this date is actually delivered via email from Luke Voss's email to Mr. Nagy and Mr. Broxwell. The document that was attached that you have seen and you'll hear about again in our findings, not only does it relate to the historic recurring revenue, this is the key maintenance revenue, that column, Your Honor, but we also focus and do on the last page, which actually says, and this is the page that was provided by Mr. Gordish at the express request of Mr. Voss. Can you flip that now? Thanks, Justin. You did a great job. I've been to this. Revenue, Your Honor, subset, maintenance revenue, confidential, trade secret information of Sargent, according to Mr. Voss. He wouldn't share it with competitors. He never shared it with competitors. Gross margin information, not shared outside the office. We heard, Your Honor, how do they protect this information? At least 2 ways. Password protected. You also heard about computeries. That's the financial system that only certain people were able to gain access to. What you heard in the testimony from Mr. Voss is that why is this information important? This information is important, Your Honor, not only because it doesn't allow you to build your budget, it allows you to project going into the future. And what do we know about the business analysis? What we learned yesterday from Mr. Brocklow is that at different points of this business analysis, since MJ didn't have one, Mr. Brocklow borrowed information from the Voss business analysis for how to compete with Sargent to create the first pro forma that existed for MJE. Now, with respect to these dates and why they're significant, by February 8th, Your Honor, MJE has gotten emails and phones for Messrs. Frame and Voss and why. The email that we looked at and saw and talked about in this case was because they wanted to make sure that there was no separation in time by Frame or Voss from their customers. But their customers are Sargent's customers. They're not Voss and Frame's. They were Sargent's. And the contact information that related to each of those individuals. Those contacts, Your Honor, those, as we heard, were downloaded by each of the Sargent employees who left. The Sargent employees, we heard this testimony, Your Honor. Mr. Frame was concerned enough to actually ask, may we do this? Mr. Simmons, concerned enough about taking contact information that related to the key people that you would go to try to obtain work at places like USS and BP and ArcelorMittal. And MJ said, yes, take it. And why? Why? Is that contact list protected, Your Honor? Yes, it is under Indiana law. A contact list that provides the Rosetta Stone, if you will. It is the secret passage to allow you to go from understanding that there are huge customers to actually being inside. That information is protected, trade secret information in Indiana. And why? For a reason that becomes clear in this case. MJE, we heard from Mr. Nagy, and we heard from Mr. Dan yesterday. From 1998, it may be earlier, but we chose that as a point because that was Mr. Nagy's memory. From 1998 to today, well, striking, until whenever the Monsanto business came, which I'll weave in a second, they had sent bids without contacts, without knowing the intricacies of how to sell and to whom to sell, and they were 0 for 16. I think Mr. Nagy used a football metaphor of some sort. They were the equivalent, I guess, of the 1970 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 0 for 16. The next piece that comes around that is significant in this process is the quick succession in which all of the key employees who've been targeted since January 14th in that business analysis leave. What you're about to see, and I'd like to skip ahead. Our first and termination dates, quickly to review, Your Honor. February 10th, Crane terminates without notice. Boss terminates and stays for 24 hours. What's Mr. Frame's first stop? The Arcelor middle trailer, in order to tell two of the his guys, that he was headed to MJ, and hey, by the way, keep your eye open for, we heard Mr. Albertson testify to this today, keep your eye open for that MJ website. There should be some job postings popping up there. Mr. Albertson's testimony just this morning. What's Mr. Schumann do? He actually, his hand gesticulation yesterday, when he was testifying, he immediately plugs in the address for Mr. Frame and also then sends me an email to make sure I've got the right spot. What happens next? The coup continues. There is a pro forma utilizing the business analysis of Mr. Voss. February 11th, Voss leaves. February 12th, Albertson applies to MJE. February 13th, Simmons is still working on Monticello documents on his Sargent laptop. By that time, he's working on his Con estimate, which we saw, Your Honor, and is included in these exhibits. Immediately, the contact lists that have been downloaded and used are out and in use, attempting to make meetings available at USS, BP, ArcelorMittal, all places that MJ had gotten into in 16 years. On February 14th, our first demand goes out for the return of our confidential information. If you have USB devices, if you have external hard drives, we want that back. That's essential information to us. As you heard in the testimony, you did receive in the mail, I think it was in the mail, one external hard drive from Mr. Frame. However, there continues to be a missing external hard drive from Mr. Frame. What you'll see is on February 14th, Paul Schumann applies for a job. February 19th. On this date, Your Honors, you remember, there were multiple interviews with the key guys from Sargent, the general foreman, project managers, estimators. And by February 20th, each of these employees, Simmons, Cabela, Schumann, and Alberson, had jobs with the enticements attached that Mr. Frame told Mr. Rockwell he thought would bring his guys over. That's in an email, as you'll recall, and you'll see again. What we also start to see is activity on the laptops. As they're getting ready to leave, Manis, who was interviewed and accepted a job, Jim Manis, he didn't come to testify, is deleting his hard drive. He does that the same day he terminates his employment with us and accepts with MJE. February 24th, Jim Simmons, Paul Schumann, and Cabela, all general foreman, estimators, key people, worked at BP, are leaving to join MJE. On February 25th, one day after he decides to quit, Your Honor, but before he actually leaves our premises on February 27th, Paul Schumann, as you heard yesterday, backs up his hard drive containing 4 years' worth of Sargent material, including BP materials. You heard that today. What else did you hear today from Mr. Weil? Just today, we found out that of the so-called 47 missing USB devices, no fewer than 7 have been plugged in. What we also found out is that the laptop at MJE that's being used by Mr. Simmons showed copies of Monosol-related information, documents from Monosol. This was the sequence I went through, Your Honor, from July through, I think it was October, 4 separate documents at a time when Mr. Simmons, as you heard him testify yesterday, I think he said he was an 8-year employee of Sargent. The place he was working on that, line 11 through 17, Sargent. The only inference to be drawn from that is that came from Sargent. And one of the ties here, Your Honor, in a trade secret violation case, which this is, in addition to Mr. Voss having confidential information still at home, what he testified, you may recall, Your Honor, is that the business analysis produced to us from MJ, he's working at MJ, he has that at home. That hasn't been destroyed or deleted or returned. He still has it with Sargent numbers. Contact information, we've talked about. You might remember a sequence. I was accused of badgering Mr. Frame at this point. But when I said to Mr. Frame, it's true, right? With respect to Rocky Shaw and Kevin Poland at ArcelorMittal, your contact, not MJ's, right? Right. You delivered that. Right. MJ did not. Right. MJ wanted you to deliver those names. Right. We went through the whole sequence. Samara Ueda at USS, John O'Brien, John Phillips at BP. All of those contacts that were originating at Sargent as a result of, and the testimony, Your Honor, on this was, although we had to fight for some of it, that it is Sargent information. And the law says it's Sargent information if those contacts are developed over a period of time when your employer is paying you to come to work, is paying for your business development, is paying for your marketing, and is otherwise protecting that information, which has obvious economic value. Is the difference between finding your way into a facility like we have or not like MJ. Also, with respect to Paul Schumann, I want to raise what I think is an important point, Your Honor, that relates to spoliation of evidence and the inferences that should be drawn from that. I think must be drawn from that under Indiana law. In this case, 7 devices that belong to Sargent contain Sargent information. Even Mr. Schumann finally admitted that yesterday. 4 years' worth of Sargent information. In the midst of this case, not only do we still have 40 devices that are missing, before that were plugged in are no longer available. What I heard from Mr. Weil today is that the only way to know for sure what's on those is to have them. And there's no way that Mr. Weil and Mr. Lano testify the same way that either of them can eliminate the possibility that those USB devices still remain in their hands, and that at some later point in time, when it's appropriate, just like the milestone, on April 16th, Your Honor, on April 16th, as you saw, there were revised bid number 2 on the same day. Mr. Simmons, as we showed with Mr. Weil today, is looking at documents copied from the Sargent system. The inference that has to be drawn is that our information is not only being disclosed but used. And under Indiana trade secret law, as you know, what do we have to establish? The only thing that we have to establish is that there's been disclosure of, there's been an attempt to share with another party our information. We don't have to prove use, although we have with respect to Mr. Simmons. And what's Indiana trade secret law say? That once you show that there's been disclosure of trade secret information, that sort of injury is irreparable. And the only appropriate remedy at that point is injunctive relief. That, Your Honor, is what we need in this case. Why do we need it, and what do we need it, and in what way do we need it? We think, Your Honor, now going back to the reasonable likelihood of success in the merits, and what we think we've established, we believe we've established breach of fiduciary duty in spades. They were competing in secret. The testimony was, you knew, Mr. Voss, you knew, Mr. Frame, that was in violation of your employee manual. Yes, you knew you could not disclose confidential financial information or any other information that would benefit you to the detriment of Sargent. Yes, you knew that was disclosed and known to Sargent, you'd be terminated. Yes. And why are we doing it? In pursuit of what? To set up a competitor to immediately start at the same starting block as Sargent. What else do we know, Your Honor? With respect to the unfair competition law, in addition to the fact that we have a property right under Indiana law for the 60 years of business that we've done, to the thousands, I think on BP alone we were employing 14,000 different 697 employees. That property interest may not be subject to unfair competition, where the apparent purpose is to push a competitor, the originator, the holder of that property right, out of business. What did you hear? Undisputed evidence about what's actually going on in Sargent right now, and you caught a glimpse of it, ironically enough, from Mr. Alverson today. Once the defection started, once the departures started, once they took 6 out of our key 9 general foreman estimators, we haven't been able to keep up with estimates. We're trying to train people right now, but we haven't gotten there. It's going to take us literally 2 years, in our view, to actually find the same sort of qualified general foreman estimators to come into our office to put us back in the same position we were in prior to this coup. That's a violation, and in our view, Your Honor, we've established not only a reasonable likelihood of success on the merits with respect to our breach of fiduciary duty claim and our unfair competition claim, but also with respect to our trade secret claim. We've shown more than disclosure, we've shown use. So we have 2 separate bases, Your Honor, to ask you for injunctive relief. As I said, our injunctive relief, and I'll close now. I don't know if
you're over.
The flare's about to go up or not.
You're up.
But 2 sentences. One, we want our devices back, and 2, to maintain the status quo, and which is the purpose of this. An injunction should issue here, Your Honor, that prevents Quanta and MJE for 2 years until we get back up with estimators from going after our core customers so they can't achieve what the unfair competition towards drive Sargent out. They can't go after BP. They can't go after USS. They can't go after ArcelorMittal. They can't go after NIPSCO inside the fence. Those are our 4 key customers. And on the balance of harm, Your Honor, you've heard testimony that has been replete about MJE, and they don't need Northwest Indiana. They have these terrific employees who are bidding on projects around the United States. So the injunction here doesn't harm MJE if you ask them to stay true to their word, that what they're really after is just a talented bench to help them estimate anywhere in the United States. That's their testimony. So the balance of harm, there is no harm if you actually believe what MJE had to say. And as for the public interest, real quick, that, I think, Your Honor, is plain. This is a corporation that's been here for 6 decades. And the law that we're going to point out says, on your way out the door, just because you're mad at your boss, you don't get to harvest trade secret information, and you don't have the opportunity to harvest that trade secret information to set up a competitor who is going to immediately be able to start up in a way that makes them immediately competitive with you without going through the financial investment and the trial and error that is part of starting a company. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Just have a moment to set up.
Sure.
Second type.
If you just switch over to defendant on your tablet, the last one you this one last one on the left. Oh, you're going to go to seal first to shut it off, I guess. See if it comes on.
It's on. There it is. Perfect. Okay, we're set.
Judge, if the court doesn't mind, the only reason I want to stand here is because of the court issue.
Oh, yeah, you need to stay in the room. It's for the microphone.
Can we turn the mic?
Yeah,
Is that
right.
okay?
Sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is where the technology comes in, so a moment, Your Honor. Judge, do you have this in front of you?
I have it.
Excellent. All right.
Nobody showed a fingerprint.
Water.
Okay. All right, we're ready when you are.
Your Honor, also on behalf of Mr. Gavaya, Mr. Senior, and all of my clients, Mr. Brockwell, Mr. Voss, and Mr. Frame, I want to thank the court for the opportunity to allow my clients to tell their story. Because over the last 6 days, Your Honor, that's what you heard out of their mouths, their story. You heard from Mr. Voss, Mr. Frame, Mr. Simmons, Mr. Alberson, Paul Schumann, Tony Broccolo, Bill Nagy, Steve Farah, through it being written in, and Mr. Dad. So they had a chance to tell you the story. And Your Honor, I think I recall my opening argument to you. And I was very clear. I said, Judge, you know, hear the evidence from the witnesses, because just because Mr. Kelly says it doesn't make it true. Just because I say it doesn't make it true either. It's because of what the witnesses tell the court. And I could spend the next 45 minutes going through that timeline and pointing out all the falsehoods contained in there. But I don't want to focus on what is not true. I'm going to focus the court on the actual story that you heard, and I saw the court throughout these proceedings, taking notes and hearing the witnesses. And so I'm comfortable that the court heard the story firsthand. And I'm going to briefly go over it. Mr. Ross and Mr. Frame were vice presidents of Sargent Electric. 50 years of combined experience in this industry. 50 plus years. Mr. Frame had been there for 24 years. 24 years. Blood, sweat, and tears, literally, for this company. And I may jump around a little bit, Judge, when the thought pops in my mind, but I've got to pause here because it bothers me to no end that after 24 years of Mr. Frame giving his heart and soul to that company, he's being called a thief, a liar, misappropriating trade secrets. When did Mr. Frame change from a terrific, hard-working, ethical individual into some type of monster with a pre-orchestrated scheme? When did that happen, and how dare they accuse him of that? Mr. Voss, 5+ years, working his butt off, sending $12, $13 million a year back a profit to this company. He's also a thief and a liar. No non-compete agreements. We should stay out of the business for 2 years? That sounds like something that I've litigated before as an unreasonable scope and duration when I've actually had a written non-compete. There is none here, Judge, and we've talked about that numerous times, nor is there a non-solicit. They want to make this about some sort of vendetta against Mr. Guest. That's why they did this? That is as ridiculous, Judge, as me coming to this court and suggesting, actually, Judge, this is Mr. Guest's vendetta against MJ Electric because he was fired there 3 years ago. That would be ridiculous for me to take that position. It's as ridiculous for them to say that this is all about some vendetta against Mr. Guest. Please. Things change. Management changes. Mr. Voss was passed over from president. Those things happen. What happens? People decide to move. Can anybody blame them? Was there any evidence that when Mr. Voss decided to leave, that they went to him and said, no, Jim, stay, we want you here, we'll figure this out? No. And there's in the proposed findings, I'll show you a document where they talk about trying to keep Mr. Frame, but there was no effort to keep Mr. Voss. Who can blame him for looking to make a move? Is that sort of wrong? He was told he was in line for the president's position. They passed him over. That's their prerogative. They don't have to hire him. It's also his prerogative to then do what's best for him and his family in response. There were certain policy changes that bothered these folks. Okay, can Sargent have those policy changes? Absolutely. Their prerogative, their company, but sometimes when you have an action, there's a reaction. And Mr. Voss and Mr. Frame decided that Sargent was going in a different direction. So what does Mr. Voss do? He doesn't create the business analysis on January 14th. In December, we started putting together a feasibility study. What if I go out on my own? Okay, can I make this work? Is there a way where I can do this? As a business major with an MBA, he knows how to put together a simple business plan. And the only information, and don't believe me, Mr. Guest was asked on direct examination, where is there any Sargent confidential information in the business analysis? And he pointed to those 3 lines under revenue with some historic, partial revenue information from a few of Sargent's customers. Whether or not that's confidential, Judge, maybe you and I could debate that, but where I don't believe there's a debate, Judge, respectfully, is that that's a trade secret. Historic financial information from from 4 customers for partial year 2013. A trade secret is something that has independent, ongoing economic value, like a formula, like the Pepsi formula. something you continue to use to make money. Historic financial information, that does not come close to rising to the level of a trade secret. And MJ did not have a business plan. I've heard that from time to time. MJ Electric never even saw what Mr. Ross put together until February 6th. February 6th, long after the gentleman received offers, accepted the offers, and decided that they were coming. MJ Electric did not rely on anything in that business analysis in making their decision to hire Jim and Tom. And what they relied on? Jim and Tom. Guys with 50 years of experience in the industry, good, honest, hardworking people with a track record of success. How did this come about? A coup? Harry Burchell suggested to Tom Frame, hey, thinking of leaving? Why don't you talk to these folks at MJ Electric? And they set up a meeting on January 14th. So did things move quickly? They did. Why? Mr. Broccolo aptly explained that. MJ Electric had been looking to get into this oil and gas, expand its oil and gas business for many years, and this was certainly an opportunity they wanted to explore. Jim and Tom said they were leaving. They were going to go somewhere. They were talking to another suitor. What's a good business practice, Your Honor? Let's move quickly. Let's see if this could be a good match. Wait, let's have a meeting in another month. These guys could be gone in another month. They were already talking to somebody. And they were highly recommended by Harry Burchell. So now they're being punished. Mr. Broccolo is going to be at MJ Electric, and Jim and Tom are going to be punished because they decided to move quickly. Good business practice, talk to these guys. How is that wrong? And MJ Electric hasn't been in this industry, in this area. Is that also a crime? They can't come in here. You know, if you haven't been here, if you haven't been in business here in a few years, you can't come. I'm sorry. You have to wait. Okay, you can come. That's fine. As Mr. Guest said, you can compete, but you can't hire anybody with any experience. You've got to hire people with no experience and start from scratch. And what has not stopped bothering me, Your Honor, in this case, from the time that I got a phone call from these gentlemen back in March, was that these individuals, Jim and Tom and the other former employees, couldn't use what's in their head and the contacts they had made for 30 years. Mr. Ross worked in a mine with Samir Awida, Northern Hydro Electric, were personal friends of these folks. If they can't leave and continue with those relationships and compete, you might as well have a non-compete agreement, because that's what they're trying to enforce upon them now. You can't have it both ways. They're allowed to leave. They're allowed to use what's in their head. Outlook, context, judge, we all have them. It's got personal information, it's got professional context, it's in their head. And Mr. Frame testified. He railed off a bunch of people off the top of his head here in court. And if you're in the business, everyone knows who the people are. And he's been in the business, both of them have been in the business for 25 plus, 30 plus years. It's not a trade secret. Their contacts, that's information that they developed with no help from Sargent. Mr. Guest testified, there's no customer database at Sargent. There's no under lock and key, here are the key contacts, here's the key contact information, here's what these guys like to have for dinner, here's how you get their business. These guys built the business. It's their relationships, and under Indiana law, and a lot of this is set forth in our trial brief, that goes with them. Or else, you know what we need to do? We need to take them to a hospital and do the prefrontal lobotomy. Then they'll know nothing, then they can go compete with Sargent because they'll have nothing further in their heads. The law is not allowed for that. So going through, we talked about what happened in January 2014. The meeting, they explored the business opportunity. Things didn't move quickly, and they resigned on February 10th. Before resigning, they continued to perform work and complete work for Sargent. There is no evidence whatsoever that they weren't working up until the very day they left, taking advantage. All of them testified. They were continuing to bid work. Mr. Frame was continuing to work on ArcelorMittal and FutureGen. Mr. Alberson talked just today about continuing to do work. Where's the evidence that they stopped working at any point in time prior to actually leaving Sargent? The day before he went on vacation, Mr. Frame went to what's called an NNA conference to make sure Sargent had everything in place going forward for the next year, signing them up for the appropriate situation going forward. To protect them. He knew he was out the door. He could have chosen, I'm not going to do it. Who cares? Who cares? I hate Mark S. I'm going to make him pay. He was there making sure at the very end the company that he worked for 24 years was protected. The preparation for the new MJ Electric office did not include any solicitation of Sargent employees, any solicitation of current Sargent customers, any interference with current Sargent projects. The testimony was undisputed. Mr. Alberson, I could tell from today's testimony, he actually was a little upset when he found out on February 10th that Tom was leaving. But we were better friends. That's how much they wanted to make sure they did it the right way. And that's how much MJ Electric wanted to make sure the guys went about it the right way. We're going to have a hiring process. And if somebody's interested, they can come in, they can post their resume, we'll interview them, they'll be interviewed by folks in Iron Mountain, and if there's a good fit, we'll give them offers. No one was delivered to MJ Electric. Folks followed, and they're allowed to do so. Each and every one of them. And they told you, in fact, I could cut it off at some point, Judge, but I sort of got the sense the court had sort of gotten the point that these folks are free to leave. They chose to leave, and they all had independent reasons for doing so. A coup? A pre-orchestrated scheme? Jim Simmons is sending emails to Tom Frame. Hey, keep me in mind. Let me know if there might be an opportunity for me. Jim Simmons was offered more money to stay at Sargent. He's sending emails to a friend of his, Brianne, saying, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Probably going to go with MJ. Don't know. Nothing was pre-orchestrated here. Mr. Manis, he wanted to stay. He was passed over for the operations manager position. And in our proposed findings, Judge, I'll direct the court to an exhibit 133, where Mr. Manis is actually applying at the same time as Saks Electric, saying, hey, here's my resume, let me know if there might be a position for me. This wasn't a pre-orchestrated coup of any type to get these folks. And the trucks and the bonuses, testimony was very clear, they were going to be needed in any event, in any and all events. Positions would need to be filled, folks need trucks, they had trucks at Sargent, that's their only vehicle, Judge. They don't have another option. And do you really think that for $7,500, people are going to leave if they much rather stay at Sargent Electric? People go where they think the work is. People move around in this industry often. Mr. Guest conceded they can move between competitors working on the same customers, so long as they don't take any Sargent information with them, and they didn't. The pro forma, let me talk quickly about that. Mr. Bronco spoke about that yesterday. It was very clear. The only information that he utilized for Mr. Voss's business analysis was some estimated costs for the office. That's not Sargent information. It was just Mr. Voss's basic estimates of what this thing would cost. That was lifted out into the pro forma, and then it was put together by MJ Electric using all of their own numbers, their financial information. The revenue number of $8 million was backed into using the cost and a 9% profit margin with the goal of breaking even. Zero reliance on any Sargent information to put that together. MJ Electric has been around for 50 years. They're not a mom and pop shop that figure, hey, we'll just set up shop here, we'll hire Jim and Tom, we'll slap an MJ Electric awning on, and say, yep, guys, keep doing what you're doing. Iron Mountain has been involved from day one. All of these guys went out there and got the orientation, learning the MJ way of doing things. It's been collaborative estimating on new work, new projects. Jeff Gabb has come down and spent months making sure these guys are taught how to do it the MJ way. There is no evidence otherwise. There is no evidence that they are using Sargent information, would want to use it, and any need for it. None of this makes sense, Judge. It just simply doesn't make sense that this company is all of a sudden going to focus on, let's just make sure we know how Sargent does it. Let's just do it their way. They've been doing just fine for 50 years. They want to expand into this market, and they're allowed to do so. But to think that all of a sudden we want any of Sargent's information, we're going to change the way we're doing things, it makes no sense, Your Honor. It simply doesn't. This is smoke and mirrors. Four things they're hanging their hat on here. 4 things. I'm going to go through each one briefly. The 9 boxes. Mr. Frame's testimony was crystal clear. He was boxing up old information from completed projects, storing it in the same warehouse already being leased by Sargent. It's under the same roof. The only question is, like me being in this courthouse, was it put in here, or was it right next door on the other side because it's too crowded in here? It was wrapped up. It was sent there for a couple weeks. When Mr. Frame realized, you know what, I'm leaving, let's bring it back. In the same condition. No evidence of copying, no evidence of removal, nothing. But no, Mr. Frame, the loyal employee in 24 years, he opened those up, copied a bunch of things, wrapped it back up, sent it back. So now he can use it for MJ Electric. That's what they want you to believe. It doesn't make any sense, Your Honor. No authority to do it. He's the general manager of the office. You have to ask for permission to box up a few old things and send them off site. Monosol line 18. Evidence, again, undisputed. This is what often is referred to as I refer to as a red herring. Monosol never requested a formal bid from Sargent on line 18. Mr. Simmons started working on a budgetary price because basically things were slowing down and he had nothing else to do. And he started putting something together, and he didn't take that with him. He took nothing with him. And then after he moves, Tim Boyle calls, that's Exhibit 126, reaches out and says, I want to meet with you guys. The customer gets to decide who they work with. And it was a meeting, and he wanted to learn about MJ Electric, and then he wanted them to bid line 18, and he then gave them the materials. Here's what you need. Here are the drawings. And it was done, a collaborative estimate put together by MJ Electric on line 18. The initial bid was put together on April 9th. All this smoke and mirrors focusing on April 16th, Your Honor, from the forensic report. When Mr. Simmons plugged in that old flash drive and realized, I got some old Monosol stuff on here. It's a week after the bid went out. How does it make any sense that he used that information to put together the bid? It was for old drawings. Let's talk briefly about those Monosol documents, which are Exhibit 71. Monosol drawings and pictures of Monosol's facility. Monosol drawings that basically have a Monosol copyright on them. The customer is certainly free to decide who gets any drawings. Those are not Sargent's trade secrets. It's not even Sargent's confidential information, much less a trade secret. It's Monosol's information. That does not arise to a trade secret. And then Exhibits 79 to 83, this is where there's a lot of bobbing and moving going on, but I want the record to be very clear. The evidence showed those documents, Your Honor, those were generated after Mr. Simmons left on new Monosol work. That was nothing that came from Sargent. So we're talking about Monosol drawings and some Monosol photos that were on that flash drive. That is, I don't think it's even Sargent information. It's certainly not Sargent's confidential information, and it doesn't even come close to being a trade secret. And it wasn't even used to put together the bid for Monosol line 18. We talked a little bit about the business analysis already, the information that is in there. They want to talk about the Luke Ross email on February 5th. In any events, folks at MJ Electric couldn't open those attachments. But for the sake of discussion, what additional information was in the February 5th business analysis. Some aggregate cost information, aggregate, for some past projects, and then a math problem, which basically, if you know the revenue, you know the aggregate cost, you can do aggregate gross margins. Historic information. That's not a trade secret either. How does that have any economic value of having some aggregate past financial information numbers? It doesn't. You can get a competitive advantage by knowing some gross numbers for a few projects. It doesn't make any sense. Why do they need it? Why would they use it? How does that leverage into? It's not, again, not a formula, not a protected customer database, which didn't exist at Sargent. Some old financial numbers, Judge. That's all it is. I want to briefly go through the forensics, which are now on your screen, as far as what Mr. Weil found. 47 missing devices. If this was a coup, Judge, if this was the pre-orchestrated scheme, I would expect that there would be a lot of these devices plugged in to MJ Electric's laptops. But what happened here, Judge, when they came out with Reclamer's report, the client, MJ Electric, and Jim and Tom, they had a choice. This report is, Mr. Lino's report is inconclusive, speculative, doesn't say anything. Nevertheless, let's take it on. We're not hiding from this. We're not just going to defeat this case solely by basically saying, well, their report is speculative. We know we're not using it. We're not concerned that it's being used. Let's do our own, let's hire the best, and let's do our own investigation. That's exactly what they did. That's not running from something. If there was a coup in the pre-orchestrated scheme, logic would dictate, hey, let's not do our own investigation. We know something bad's going to pop up. So they do their own investigation. They've got 6 hits, and each one was explained in detail by Mr. Weil. Each one. No indication for the 6 USB devices, no indication of any file transfer or opening on an MJ computer system. None. 0. 2 of the 6 devices, 2 documents pop up. A Crown Point spare phone list, Exhibit 141 with Jeff Gadd's name on it, and the Monosol drawings and pictures I already spoke about in the report. That's it. That's all. Their MRU list, all the MRU files, right, and all those appendixes. Let's see if any pop up on the MJ laptops. 1. Judge, the ACES document, and I'll refer you in our proposed findings of fact because Mr. Mann has talked about that. That's a personal file of his where he keeps financial information, budgets, personal to-do lists, the gentleman owns a tanning salon, etc. That was the 1 hit of something on the MRU list that also showed up on an MJ laptop. 1 out of, I don't even know how many. There were a couple of ConS files that were identified, but there was no, the 2 ConS files that were referenced in the Reclamer report, again, not found on the MJ computer system. There's a lot of talk, Your Honor, Mr. Lino, and Mr. Weil of C to E, E to C. The C documents, Your Honor, the so-called C drive files that they allege were moved to an E file, even though those E files and the C files never show up on an MJ laptop, they actually could have shown them to you, Judge, because they still have them. They still have them. They were on the laptops. So why did they bring them in here? Instead, Mr. Kelly talks about the project cash flow analysis. Mr. Frame said that's a blank form document. All these other documents that he was working on in mid-January he was still working for. And he was still working for Sargent. Those documents, even though they don't show up at all on MJ's computer system, are so critical. You would think they would print them out and show them to this court. And they didn't. This is what it is. It's all smoke and mirrors. That timeline was so far off from what you actually heard. But they're trying to create this environment to make you think that something bad must have been going on, Judge. Something bad. I can't prove it. It's all speculation. It's all conjecture. But something bad must have been happening, and I'm worried about it, so keep them out of Northwest Indiana for 2 years, because I'm concerned. That's not a basis for injunctive relief. Let's talk about Mr. Schuman's personal hard drive for a moment. We took that one head on. Once we realized that that evidence came to light, what did we do? Gave it to Mr. Weil, run an analysis. Let's knock that one out, make sure there's no inference. And Mr. Weil runs an analysis, testifies here before the court that there were no files on the personal hard drive that were copied or transferred to an NJ laptop. None of the MRU files on the NJ laptop matched any of the files on this hard drive. No file names from Sargent's MRU list showed up on the personal hard drive. And the files that were accessed when this was plugged into the NJ computer, personal files, pictures. It's at a cheerleading competition. And Mr. Schuman himself said, hey, I don't want any part of this, okay? I don't know if there's Sargent information on it. We'll give it back. And happy to do that. We will do that. All we want to make sure is that any personal information of Mr. Schuman is not even a defendant in this case, that he gets to keep his personal information. Okay? Problem solved. The law. All of this, Judge, number one, I think that you all already know respectfully, so I'm not trying to educate the court in any way. It's also all in our trial brief that we set forth at the beginning. So it's already been given to you. I think I might highlight a couple slides for the court. Injunctions will not be issued merely to allay the fears and apprehensions or to soothe the anxieties of the parties. That's what they want you to do. They don't want us around. They want to stifle competition. I wonder what the customers would be saying. I wonder if BP was here, and ArcelorMittal, and NIPSCO, and Monasol, and U.S. Steel, if they were in this court, what would their view be? No, Judge, keep MJ Electric and everyone else out. We don't want competition. We don't want people vying for our work and having competitive bidding. I'm confident they would want just the opposite. Mr. Kelly went through certainly the elements of the preliminary injunction. Under Indiana law, competitor may solicit another competitor's at-will employees and offer those employees bonuses and enticements. The Finish Line versus Foot Locker case. Nothing wrong with what was done here. They talk about these breaches of fiduciary duty. These guys were looking to make a move, and you can plan to do so before you leave. I'm not sure if anyone in this courtroom can honestly say that they moved jobs without planning to do so beforehand, and it's allowed under the law. And once again, they worked to the very end. And then emotionally, Mr. Frame wanted to leave, and he wanted to leave quickly, and who can blame him after 24 years? It was hard for him to say goodbye. And you saw his genuine emotions right here in court, Judge. There's going to be unfair competition. The evidence has to show that the primary purpose is to destroy a competitor's business. Where was there evidence of that? MJ Electric is its own company. They're worried about MJ Electric. For lack of a better word, Judge, and with due respect, it's somewhat narcissistic of Sargent to think that this was all about them. It's not all about them. It's about a company wanting to expand its business into a new area and finding a great opportunity with two quality, experienced individuals. It's not about Sargent, Judge. It never has been, and it never will be. Talked about what a trade secret is, Judge, and the court's already aware it's something that where independent economic value is derived. And I'll tell you what's not a trade secret, Judge, under Indiana law. Customers that can otherwise be identified through trade publications, contacts with other customers, competing business, properly acquired knowledge, experience, and personal relationships that you obtain through the course of employment. That's what these guys have. And if they can't use that, Judge, then you know what? None of them could ever leave Sargent. They can't. Because if you can't use that information, my experience, the people I know that I've got to know over 30 years, I can't tap that and say, hey, I'm now at MJ Electric, I'd like to sit down with you, get to know my new company. I can't do that. If they can't do that, you can't go anywhere, ever, unless you move out of Northwest Indiana. Decide I'm going to take the family and we're going to go somewhere else. Can't do it. The Icon case in particular, I think, is helpful, Judge, when we talked about that. The high road. Not my words, Your Honor, although I'm going to borrow them now from Mr. Broccolo and Mr. Farrell. Exhibit 121. From the start, contemporaneous documents. Do it the right way. Here's how we're going to do it. Mr. Broccolo talked about here's what our approach is going to be. And that's what they followed. And now, no good deed goes unpunished because they're coming after them with both barrels. They took the high road. Where are the smoking gun documents? Where are the documents that are saying, hey, here's the plan. We're going to meet on February 10th, and we're going to go right after Sargent's business. All right? Talk to Samir. Here's what we're going to do. There's none of that because it didn't happen. They went about it the right way. And today, Judge, while they're trying to make a go of it, we're not the ones, MJ Electric's not the ones at BP or ArcelorMittal or NIPSCO or U.S. Steel. They're still working there. And they had plenty of estimators, both in East Chicago, T.R.O, Pittsburgh, Lake Energy, and they're doing just fine. Mr. Guest talked about that. So to sit here and as if we hit the ground running and all of a sudden, boom, 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 we just took over these contracts, we're in on BP, we're approved, it hasn't happened. We're certainly trying to get our foot in the door, make no mistake, but it hasn't happened. This whole corporate rating theory, the evidence was consistent throughout. These folks moved, and it is very hypocritical. There are pleadings that we presented the court from the Randy Johnson, who left Continental. Five of his folks followed him, and he set up shop at Sargent and is working on the exact same customer with the exact same project that he was working for at Continental. And Continental sued Sargent, and Sargent defended that to the very end, saying, we did nothing wrong. But I guess what's good for the goose is not good for the gander, because basically the same thing happens here. Actually, it's not the same thing. Our situation is much better than what happened with Randy Johnson. And these folks followed, and all of a sudden, something was wrong. They're doing something wrong, Judge. Stop them. They hired talented, experienced individuals who were free to leave. We already talked about all the different things that are not a trade secret. They point to the Outlook context. That's not a trade secret. Non-solved drawings are not a trade secret. And little tidbits of Sargent's historical financial information for some subset of customers for 2013. None of that is entitled to trade secret protection. Mr. Dabb yesterday was simply terrific on the stand because it was late in the day and he was to the point and concise and clear. Everything is being done collaborative estimating the MJ way. Exhibit 16, those rates to ArcelorMittal. Who put those together? Jim or Tom? Jeff Dabb put it together. But I guess there's a coup and there's a pre-orchestrated scheme, and we're using all of Sargent's information that somehow Jeff Dabb is the one who's doing all this. And we're just trying to throw them off the trail by having Mr. Dabb involved and working out of the Crown Point office. Likelihood of success on the merits, Judge? They haven't respectfully come close to showing by preponderance of the evidence that there is any likelihood of success on the merits. Where is the trade secret misappropriation? Where is the unfair competition? They haven't demonstrated it. There's no irreparable harm. The balancing of the harms, why would MJ Electric have to stay out of this area for 2 years? Because they happen to have other business across the country? So does Sargent. somehow their company is more important than MJ Electric? There's no balancing of harms in favor of Sargent Electric. The public interest is served, judged by fair competition, more industry, more workforce. That's the public interest is served, not by stifling competition. So a few points in conclusion, Judge. I'm going to wrap it up and I'm going to sit down and thank the court. Sargent has thrown all these dots out there. They can't connect them. They can't demonstrate that this was a coup, a pre-orchestrated scheme, and that they've done anything wrong, or that we're using any of their information, or that we would have any need to use their information. At some point, logic has to take over here, Judge, and when you hear witness after witness after witness suggesting we don't want it, we don't need it, and here's how we're doing it. Here's our price recap sheet, here's the backup, here's how we put together estimates. The dots cannot be connected. The motion is based on speculation, innuendo, and conjecture. And while it's their burden, I feel like my clients have been here and they're asking us, prove a negative. Prove a negative. It's not our burden, but I think we've done it. If the burden did shift, I think we've proven the negative because there's nothing there to point to where we're using Sargent information or we took any trade secrets. But that's what this case is about. Prove a negative. We talked about this with Mr. Getz. Access doesn't equal misappropriation. It doesn't equal stealing. Something is missing. It doesn't also mean, Judge, that it's been copied or stolen. And I do think, when I was asking Mr. Getz, the idea of 8 rights make a wrong, he even said it's okay for one person to leave, maybe 2 people to leave. 3 people, it's fine. But at some point, because 8 folks make independent decisions with options to leave, all of a sudden, well, now this is wrong. The evidence is that people move around, and sometimes when the leaders leave, people certainly follow. And there's no doubt that was a possibility here. But each of them had an opportunity to stay, could have stayed, and chose not to. They shouldn't be punished for that decision, nor should MJ Electric. And this is another thing I've been thinking about, Judge, from certainly the start of this case. For this court to grant any semblance of the relief that Sargent is suggesting, I respectfully submit that the court has to come to the conclusion that all the people that spoke to you under oath are lying. Mr. Voss, Mr. Frame, Mr. Broccolo, all the witnesses who told you we don't have it, we're not using it, we don't need it, I didn't take anything, I don't have the devices, here's why I left. That's the theory of their case. And I'm not here telling you Mr. Guess is a liar because Mr. Guess doesn't have personal knowledge by his own admission. So I'm not suggesting he's lying and we're telling the truth. We are telling the truth. And I think the court would have to find otherwise in order to grant them the relief. And I think each and one of our witnesses were incredibly honest and forthright with this court. And the missing piece, Judge, is why is the fact that these folks left, why is that all on MJ Electric as if they did something wrong? Doesn't Sargent have to look in the mirror a little bit and say, what role did we have in this process where people were less than satisfied and chose to go somewhere else? Instead of looking in the mirror, they come to this court and they're pointing fingers at us. That's not right. And Sargent needs to take some responsibility for the decisions that each of these folks decided. Like they had options. Mr. Frank could have stayed. They wanted him to stay. He chose not to. Mr. Simmons was offered $50,000 more. He chose not to. Mr. Manis could have stayed. They chose not to offer him the operations manager position. He decided to leave. Mr. Alberson could have stayed. Jeff Schumann was offered a position. He decided to move on. That's their right. That doesn't mean they get sued, Judge, and accused of lying and stealing and thievery. Again, Your Honor, I may have gone over my 30 minutes. I apologize for that. I want to speak on behalf of myself.
Everything's gone over in this case.
Well, I decided I would be done by 2:47, and I have 13 more seconds. Thank you very much for your patience in hearing me out and hearing from my clients. Respectfully, the motion, Sergeant's motion should be
All right. All right, you want to submit findings and conclusions?
Yes, Your Honor.
How much time do you both think you'll need to do that?
I'd like to,
I think Ms. Sullivan suggested 14 days. Is
14 days would work for
that
us.
enough time?
That sounds good.
Okay. So I'll expect your findings and conclusions in 14 days. Anything further? Yes?
The findings and conclusions, do you want them emailed to the court as well, submitted on?
Submit them on disk
Okay.
and hard copy and disk.
Not a USB, a CD, right?
A CD, right. Okay.
Thanks again, Your Honor.
You're welcome, gentlemen. Thank you. You both presented a very good case for your respective clients. And I'll await your findings, conclusions, and I'll get a decision out quick.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All rise.